9:30. And they'll be here in due course, I've got no doubt.
Shall we do a light polling?
Yeah, well, so what's the process here, Liz?
So,
Are we on live stream?
just setting up. Yes.
Cool. Okay, welcome to the Implementation Committee, 14th of April. To kick it off, apologies. Councillor Hope, I think we should put in.
Yes, just a light apology for when they come.
Here's Councillor Robinson. And maybe, I'm not sure about Councillor Dickey. We haven't heard from Councillor Dickey. Yeah, thank you. Are there any apologies? I don't think there are. So on that basis, we'll move on to the next is public forum. Liz, have there been any requests for public forum?
No, they have not.
There's been no requests. Confirmation of the agenda. Unless somebody puts a hand up, I'll take the agenda as read and distributed. Conflicts of interest. Yeah, two agenda items today. One about co-funding of flood protection schemes, and the second one to catchment programs. Are there any conflicts of interest? No conflict. There's not a hand in the air. Councillor Calvert. No conflicts of interest. Good. Confirmation of minutes. Is somebody prepared to move the minutes? Councillor Hope, and do we have a seconder? I didn't.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Noon. I'll put the confirmation. Those that agree that the minutes are true and correct. Those for. Aye. Against. Carried. Right. Open action resolutions from the committee. Action register. Cool. So most of them have a status of completed, I noticed. There's just two there at the bottom. One in progress, decision on future rabbit control assets, and the due date is still a distance away. So I think that's all good. And
Could we have a wee report from Gary, from Councillor Kelleher, because I think he's on a committee about those rabbit control.
Sounds good, because it does make the the comprising Councillor Kelleher and staff met. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a conclusive report, but an update would be amazing.
Excuse me, we've got a Michael Decker email. He can't get in. I think he isn't at the Zoom link. Sorry, apologies for the interruption.
No, not at all. That's good. I think we should carry on nevertheless, or should we pause? Yeah. Councillor Kelleher, any update or just any comments you've met?
Yeah, there is a real rabbit issue that's continuing.
Yeah.
In Central Otago especially, and I think across dry parts of Waiheke as well.
Yeah.
The programs that the LRC have been in place and are seem to be working well so far. There seems to be engagement with the community so far.
Well, that's great.
It's all reliant on the conditions at the time. So in some areas we're really dry, especially South Otago is very, very dry. So it differs really going into winter. Winter is the key time for rabbit control. So I've also had a discussion with
The assets?
on the assets.
Yeah.
And a paper will be brought to
The 6th.
the 6th, correct? On that, there probably is some differing in thinking about whether to retain the assets or not. My position remains very concerned if we were to lose those assets currently, and the discussions I'm having with the community, or certainly with the pest controllers I engage with, that while we still have an unknown as to how the escalation of this pest is going to continue, we should be retaining those assets.
Okay, well, it's good that those conversations are happening, and maybe there's a compromise position. I have no idea, but I look forward to that report. Great. Unless there's any other comments, I think the other
Ken-
action. Sorry,
Yeah.
Councillor Fell.
You might be just finishing that with the other action, but it may be that we could have we report from Andrea Howard too about the other action, because a sign doesn't, a report would be good, just a wee something.
Sorry, no, I'm not quite sure, Councillor Cabot, what you're talking about.
The last action,
Sorry, the last action.
the last action point here is got just described as status assigned.
Oh, I see.
So
Okay,
it would be good to know, I mean, that doesn't,
Sorry, I thought you said a sign.
it could just stay there forever. So we don't know where that is and how it's going and anything about it. A sign doesn't sort of I don't find it gets me to understand any more about whether it's happening or not happening or going to take 6 months or just a wee something.
Yeah. You might want to remind me of that. And that what we could ask, is Andrea here now or?
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to speak to this item if you wish.
Well, that's very good. Thank you, Gavin.
Yes, apologies. I should have updated the register to summarise the action taken, but we are bringing a paper to the September committee meeting round that will summarise our effectiveness methodology approach to the entire pest plan, including rabbits.
Oh, that's great. So you'll put that in the due date box, September, yeah?
Yes, I will. I'll update the register.
Cool. Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Decker. We're still on the action items. Can you hear us?
I can, thank you.
Cool. Right. Well, without any further ado, we will go to our first agenda item. The first agenda item, actually, I'll open it. Be beneficial. Right, the first agenda item is Central Government Co-Investment and Flood Protection Schemes by Michelle Niffen and Dr. Gavin Palmer, endorsed by Dr. Gavin Palmer. I will just reaffirm 4 key points. The first one is the purpose, to update council on work being undertaken by the Regional Council Sector to obtain ongoing central government co-investment in flood protection and river management schemes, and present to council a supplementary report prepared by the sector for central government on permanent co-investment in New Zealand's flood protection schemes. The second point comes out of the report is that floods are New Zealand's most frequent and cumulatively most significant avoidable hazard. They are the natural hazard most able to be mitigated through application of well-proven package of flood protection schemes. They're also the natural hazard with the best return on investment from measures contributing to active risk reduction. The third point is to note that government co-investment has recently occurred with the Shovel Ready projects following the COVID-19 event. 4 OSC projects specifically relating to flood protection were successful in receiving $5.5 million of central government funding out of a total of $300 million committed. So we need to acknowledge that central government is in this space. And the final point is, however, the regional sector has yet to achieve central government commitment to $150 million per annum co-investment contribution to enhance the integrity of flood protection schemes, particularly in the light of climate change and increasing weather intensity. So there it is. Dr. Palmer, welcome. Is Michelle there as well? Yes, she is.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to invite either of you to make any comments on this report, and thank you for the work and others that has been put into it.
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you for this opportunity. This has been rolled out nationally starting last week with Canterbury to present this report to regional councils. It's really important to note that this work around this report continued on following the Shovel Ready work in the background, and really it sort of got its momentum from the 2021 Ashburton and Canterbury flooding. So Canterbury has really been sort of leading this space. We haven't had co-investment or central government support in the regional council sector for some time. I think this is a positive step forward to us to have a budget line item under the Climate Emergency Response Fund. You'll note in the executive summary that, in the background, government has been approached and it didn't accept the consideration to have this budget line last year. So this is another attempt to sort of get government's appetite to continue the work with regional sectors around our climate resilience and infrastructural support. Sorry, that's all I really wanted to comment on.
No, that's great. Dr. Palmer?
No, I think we'll be happy to take any questions.
Right. Okay, so this is principally a noting report, but nevertheless we'll focus on questions and then followed by a debate, if there's any debate around the principles of the report. Councillor Hope.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Mifflin and Dr. Palmer and your team for this report. It's absolutely brilliant. This is Canterbury leading the way, or ECAN, isn't it? But this also has a particular Otago flavour, if you like. That's my first comment I want to make. But there's something else that I wanted to make, and I must say I appreciated the document. It was a brilliant read. There's something I want to highlight and I want to ask you, and it's probably a question maybe for you, Dr. Palmer. I look at all this, I look at the flooding, I look at the fact that it's consistent, as in we're getting more and more of it. We have to do so much adaptation, but I look at it and think, is there a bit of a concern here for Three Waters? Does it make it more tricky if you're in the Three Waters boat? Is there more cost to you as a local authority with flooding? I just wondered, please, if we could tease that out a bit more.
Gavin?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is quite separate from Three Waters. So when we talk Three Waters, we're talking about infrastructure to do with stormwater, water supply, and wastewater collection and disposal. What this paper is about is flood protection, which is related to stormwater, but is very distinctly different from it. And so the Three Waters reform will not address this issue, which is why we have this quite separate sector prepared co-investment case, because there's a standalone case for investment in flood protection in addition to the Three Waters thing, which is quite separate.
Sorry, I didn't actually ask that very well. Can I have another shot at that?
Yeah, sure, Councillor Hope.
Sorry, I apologise, Dr. Palmer, for my how I asked this. Let me ask you another way. If I look at South Dunedin, we have a lot of infrastructure, mostly related to groundwater control. We do have the land drainage, and it is fundamentally about ground control. But all I'm asking you, does either responsibility shift or do the priorities shift with the adaptation of more rain, more flooding, more likeliness? I mean, the stormwater planning, delivery, and operation will obviously be different, but I just wanted to be clear about the role of adaptation, please.
Can I just jump in? Can I just jump in there before I pass it over to Dr. Palmer? I wonder actually if your question, Councillor Hope, is just through some of the points that are raised in this report, it becomes apparent that maybe the territorial authorities' responsibilities may change with Three Waters. I mean, obviously they will,
Sure.
Not only with wastewater schemes and so forth, but also with stormwater and say, for example, with South Dunedin, we'll now have a Three Waters. Well, if Three Waters becomes an entity, it potentially could be in that space as a stakeholder as well. But I'll pass it over to Dr. Palmer. It's possibly a slightly different topic than what we're here to discuss today. Dr. Palmer.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it was probably a question better handled at yesterday's South Dunedin program paper, strategy and planning, but if the question is, what does Three Waters reform mean for adaptation for South Dunedin, which I think is what the question might be, then what it means based on current decisions of government and direction of travel is that the new Three Waters entity would have the responsibility for stormwater infrastructure in South Dunedin, and would therefore have an important role to play in adaptation for future climate change. Have I answered the question?
Yeah, I think you've answered the question as chair of this meeting. I think it's generally out of the scope of this meeting, but it's an interesting topic. And as you said, it's possibly a topic that could have been fleshed out a bit further yesterday. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you. My question is just around, and correct me if I'm wrong here. So we're saying we have $88 million worth of assets at the moment, and we are in the long-term plan, we're looking for $25 million of expenditure from years 1 to 10, which then will protect the $88 million of assets. First question, I suppose, is how much we are, through the regional sector, seeking some investment from central government of 150 million. How much of that are we hopeful for our assets?
At this stage, the allocation of the 150 million sought has not been worked through, but what we do know is that in our infrastructure strategy, we've got a total spend on flood protection of about 400 million. So, and it averages about $10 million a year over the first 10 years of the infrastructure strategy. So, although the allocation has not been worked through, we've got numbers in our infrastructure strategy that say that we need significantly more investment to deal with climate change and other drivers than we presently have access to.
It's interesting to note, Dr. Palmer, Councillor Callaghan, that with the COVID projects, there was a central government expenditure of something like 300 million, of which we got 5.4. Now, for this co-investment, the regional sector is asking for half that, 150 million per year. On the same ratio, we would land up with 2.5 million. What's that going to buy us, Dr. Palmer, or are these proportions out of line?
I think through Mr. Chair, one of the things for this council is that some of the big future infrastructure spends don't have investigation programs sufficiently advanced to put a number around what the cost of implementation will be. So, for example, we know we need to adapt the Lower Clutha flood protection scheme to deal with the shoreline retreat issue. We know that that will require relocation of infrastructure, but it's too early yet to scope up the exact form of the adaptation and therefore to price it. Similarly, we know at some point in the future, some work's going to have to be done on Lindsay Creek, but again, investigations and program development are not sufficiently advanced to be able to put a number around that.
I see. And if I might ask a question, is in fact then our expectation of the Otago Regional Council and potentially seeking funds more of a lumpy situation where, depending on the scheme, we may ask for a high percentage? Dr. Palmer.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I think that's a good point. It's not, it won't be a uniform spend profile for any individual council or between councils. You can appreciate that programs would have, lumpy bits in it, and then that will be compounded between councils depending on where their respective programs are at. So it's not a simple matter of saying we need X per annum smoothed out. It's going to depend very much on how the nature of the projects and the timing around their delivery.
Cool. You good, Gary?
Well, just to follow on that, I assume there is quite a level of build up to get to these projects. So the sooner that we are underway with an understanding of what the extent of the project is, the cost implications, and then how we gather the capital for it, then the sooner we actually achieve the project. But it just worries me that as our climate changes and our floods escalate, that are we reaching some critical points or some critical times where we may not be able to defer these projects much longer?
And I suspect that's what this whole report's all about, yeah?
Yeah,
Is that a question,
I guess, yes, that's a question, please.
Dr. Palmer?
Yes, these issues are urgent. We know that there are long lead times to put schemes in place. And so coming back to Lower Clutha, for example, you've already received reports on the rapid rate at which the shoreline is retreating. And it's now become quite urgent to progress our investigations. And those are progressing very, very well in terms of what is the nature of the response, what is the timing around it, and what will it cost.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Right, we have two on Zoom, Councillor Decker, Councillor Laws, and then I see Councillor Malcolm has his hand in there. So we'll start with Councillor Decker.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I found the paper and the two attachments absolutely fascinating. And I'm curious as to why, when the maps of scheme benefits, particularly relating to Otago, show a large chunk of flood scheme benefits in the Arrow Basin, and I wasn't aware that we had a flood scheme in the Arrow Basin. And yet the Alexandra flood scheme, which is, I think, very substantial, is not shown on the map at all. Can anybody explain that to me?
Councillor Decker, before I pass it over to Dr. Palmer or Michelle, what page is that on, please?
I'm looking at page 95 of the Tonkin and Taylor report, but the same map is shown in the earlier Canterbury-derived report too.
Okay. Michelle or Gavin, who would like to respond to that?
Something for Norkie as well.
Yes, I can respond to that, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I think the presentation of that could have been probably a bit better. The Alexandra scheme has been bundled into the Lower Clutha figures, so it's treating the Clutha Mata'ao as a single entity, if you like. But it would have been better to have, particularised it to show the Alexandra flood protection scheme. And my recollection of the other one is it'll be referring to our Shotover training line and associated works.
Oh, really? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, well, thank you for resolving that for me. I was curious about it. Thanks, Brian.
Great, thank you. Councillor Laws, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Brian. It's an awful lot of work gone into this from all the councils to try and garner $150 million that the government apparently has decided it doesn't want to give us.
Per annum?
Per annum, 150 million per annum, yeah. The government hasn't said yes to this, has it, Dr. Palmer? And given the other vote demands like health, police, education, social welfare, superannuation, etc., what the first question I have is, has the regional councils done a prospect of success consideration?
Dr. Palmer?
Yes, and that's why it's being brought forward. And we think that there is a possibility. And if we don't present the case, then we're never going to get the money. So our feeling is, given the increased focus and timing around climate change adaptation particularly, the timing is right for seeking the contribution from government. But as you say, we're obviously competing with a range of other demands on government. Having said that, a key consideration for government is we either invest in reducing risk up front, which is what this is about, or the government ends up carrying the cost with communities of damage. And as we have experienced, when we suffer damage, we end up making claims to the National Emergency Management Authority, for example. So the government can either pay at the front or it can pay at the back.
Okay, yeah, that's a good argument. The second question I want to ask you is the graph that's on, or the table on page 137. And it lists for each of the regional councils basically their flood infrastructure. We, of the share of $150 million, I'm looking at the sort of the Canterburys, the Manawatus, the Waikatos, the Hawke's Bays, and really as a proportion, we're not much of that, are we? I mean, the of $150 million, we wouldn't be expected to see much of it, would we? Given the demands of those other councils and the assets and the networks that they have.
I think that depends. Well, one thing is that those numbers are based around the schemes we have today, not the schemes we need for the future. So coming back to my Lower Clutha example, what it's not showing is the future investment requirements. And that will vary between regions. The other thing that will vary between regions is readiness to act. And as Councillor Kelleher has said, it's really important that we continue to progress our work so that we are ready, potentially ahead of other councils, to invest where we need to do so.
Yeah, but have the regional councils worked out a priority schedule for if they are successful in gaining that funding? That would seem to me the bun fight that is going to determine who gets what, surely.
Through Mr. Chair, no, the allocation model has not been worked through yet, and yes, there will be an element of competition in a similar way to transport funding through the National Land Transport Fund. Those sorts of things would need to be worked through.
Yeah, and that's what worries me. Listen, there's all power if you can get money for nothing, but I mean, yeah, we're still going to have to fight for it if it arrives. Thank you.
Get money for nothing. I don't think anybody gets money for nothing. Thank you.
Well, it would be a gift from the government to us.
Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, just on the apportionment of the co-investing funding, there's a table on page 25 that gives that's the initial way that they that the authorities propose to spread it out, I assume. So all I'm saying, if people had a look at that, that might give us some idea of how that was going to be apportioned out. That was the starting point anyway. So
is there a question there?
No, I was just showing. I should have probably put my hand up when you were talking about it, but if you read that, that gives a pretty good idea, I thought.
Could you direct me to that? Because I don't have on my papers at page 25 that says
Tricky.
Right.
It's a bit tricky. It's on the
Apportioning
top.
co-investment
It's
fund.
page 10 of the first report.
Yeah,
Page 25 of our agenda.
page 10 of the first. Yeah, page 10 of the first report.
Or 103 on the bottom of the next column table. Really tricky.
Oh, you mean the one with all the ticks?
Yes.
Okay.
No,
No,
apportionment co-investment funding.
page 10 of the first report.
Oh, I had that.
Page 25 on diligent.
Is it?
Yeah.
We asked the page,
No,
and
no,
that didn't
yes.
come up.
And
Sorry.
that's 25 on diligent.
Did it? Hang on, sorry for a sec, because that's what we were looking at. See, we've got a 25.
Central Government Co-Investment and Flood Protection Scheme Supplementary Report.
So it's
Yeah, that's the one I can see too. That's my page 28, 29. There you go.
See, I thought it was that one. It's not, is it?
Okay, that is it, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're all different. That's
Okay,
right.
so Councillor Malcolm has confirmed that it is that page 25.
Just page 10 of that report.
Okay.
So that's
It's not a graph. It's
an overview of using
Oh,
Yeah, sorry, I got
No,
the table over here, so I- Anyway, Councillor Noon, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good discussion, but I think we need to lift ourselves up a little because this paper is around the principle of getting the government committed back in a space they used to be, and haven't been for some time. And an earlier paper, 2019 paper that was initiated by the Regional Sector Group, was sort of the stepping stone. Now this one now has more detail and probably greater justification to push for a co-funding commitment by central government in relation to the flood infrastructure. I sound like I'm speaking to the motion, but I thought it was useful to just outline that this is about rivers and streams. So if we just can focus on that rather than, you know, stormwater systems or three waters or whatever. And it's also about getting the government to be more proactive, because I think that's what local government want to do. We want to be more proactive in terms of ensuring that our flood schemes are fit for purpose rather than being reactive, like in a flood situation where you've got to rebuild the schemes or and then probably make them more resilient. So this is about having a funding stream that could then provide some greater certainty for local councils to, I imagine, apply and be a contestable type regime. I know that hasn't been settled how the funding would be allocated, but I imagine it may be a bit like the Jobs for Nature type regime. But the key really is to try and get ahead of the curve with regards to flood events being more frequent and greater intensity. It's looking at trying to ensure that those flood schemes are more resilient. And I suppose the other theme in this this attempt to get the government around the funding table is to recognise there's a lot of government infrastructure that is actually protected by local government flood schemes as well. And that's quite a strong lever to use in this argument.
For example, the university.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, there's some really strong levers there. I'm not saying this will be a successful, up against all the other funding, as Councillor Lords alluded to, but it's pretty strong justification to get the government around the table, the funding table.
Okay. So I think we've moved into the debate.
I'll move. Yes, I'd like to. That's what I had my hand up for, to move the motion.
So we've got a mover, Councillor Calvert, maybe a seconder, Councillor Robinson. So we've moved into the debate. And I think what our chair, Councillor Nunes, said is you're generally supportive of what's happening here. So is there any other discussion? We have two recommendations. One's to note the report, and the second is to note the regional sector work seeking to obtain central government co-investment flood protection river management scheme. So there it is. We have a mover and a seconder. Is there any debate? Councillor Calvert, followed by Councillor Robinson.
My comment, well, there's two bits. The first is that I like where the whole thing's going and always get central government to share some of our taxpayers' money where possible, send it back down south. What it seems to me is while we're doing this, and I think these are wonderful efforts on behalf of our staff and things, and thank you guys, and how we're involved, because often we don't know what's happening underneath the water. We just see the ducks, we don't see the paddling. So thanks for the paddling. But in particular, I think it's the important thing to do with this report is to have it in a format in a way that when the government's looking around and thinking, I'm doing my budget, I'll throw some at health and I'll throw some at this and I'll throw some at that, and they get to the climate change, we're supposed to put some money in our budget to climate change, that this is one that's an attractive, yeah, that would be a good one, that's going to get me votes, that's going to be a good thing for our so ours wants to be an attractive thing for the government to invest money in. So we should be concentrating at some level on the packaging of the present, not just that it's a fabulous present inside. Yeah. So I think that's really important, because when the government's feeling like it, I mean, at the moment it can do what it wants. there will be a position where it's actually thinking, how do I do the right thing here and please the most number of people? And we want ours to look nicely packaged and to be just the sort of thing that they can bend down, pick up, get a really good response from.
Very good, thank you. I suspect on a similar basis, Councillor Calvert, to what we did for the shovel-ready projects, where we very quickly had commitment of $5.4 million from central government.
Yes, exactly. Look attractive.
Councillor Robertson, followed by Councillor Watson.
Thanks. Yeah, what Councillor Calvert said leads in nicely to what I was going to say. It's a really, really good initiative. I'm excited by this. I think that it's local government at its best, proactively putting its foot forward collectively. I can see that there's been a lot of work going in here to transparently show the package, as Councillor Calvert spoke on. The local government sector is gathering up its facts on what are the true costs of these flood protection and river management schemes, and also what are the benefits. And I can see that we're doing that as well as a council, and we've done that work. So being able to put our finger on that and quickly present that's really important in the light of the Climate Change Adaptation Act. So at the moment, as a country, we're weighing up all of those factors and coming up with an actual act on how we're going to meet the changing demands of increasing hazards. So in doing that, we're going to need to have a look at all the different approaches that we could take, avoiding or mitigating, I suppose, are both adaptation approaches. So in what instances would you do either of those? Well, you're going to need all that maths on, what are the controls we've already got in place, flood protection, river management, and at what points do approaches change? Well, the government's going to need all of this information in its thinking, and we need to be thinking together as a country, both local government and central, on where those basically just really get it's going to come down to quite logical equations on where investment stacks up, both now and into the future, and when it doesn't, to be honest, and when we need to start thinking about adaptation clearly as a country. We're in this together, and as you very correctly said, Dr. Palmer, this is at times going to stack up absolutely clearly that the investment is now rather than the cleanup. So, well said. Thank you.
Oh.
Very good, Gretchen.
Very good. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. There's a whole lot of stuff that's really good about this report, and I concur with most of the statements made to date. There are some things that I want to point out, and which I think are really, really interesting. Page 45, which is the breakdown of the Canterbury's physical works that would be part of their costs, and I'm amazed that 50% of that is tree replacement. And it's an area that I don't think I've rabbited on about. I don't know if anyone's actually listened, but it's an area that I think we need to be doing some real work on and getting rid of willows, which cause a huge problem later on and a huge maintenance cost. They've been very effective doing what they need to do in the short term, but have a huge long-term cost. And so I'm really interested to see if we could garner or word our response in a way that looked at alternative to poplars and to willows. It would be absolutely fantastic, and to looking at more native use would be great. The other one I would look at was page 105, and the comment in there which I thought was really, really interesting, and about the lack of consistency in rating for flood schemes. I find it really odd that we're all supporting this, nodding our heads that this should be a general ratepayer cost, and yet when we come to rate for the benefits of these flood schemes, we pivot on a very small number of people. If you're going to be saying that this should be paid by the taxpayers, then let's be honest, then we think the benefits are greater than those just living nearby. You can't have it both ways. And at the moment, we've had complaint after complaint about those farmers who join some schemes, or landowners and house owners, who pay a substantial amount of flood protection as they are the beneficiaries. This benefits every bit of infrastructure. We're going to this because the government has infrastructure in there that is protected, whether it be airports or state highways. And we're saying you should be contributing to these flood protection works because we're protecting your stuff. And then one moment next, we're saying actually all of the benefits, or 88% of them, go to just some landowners we can rate. We don't generally rate at a large scale for those works. So it is a disproportionate. I think this has convinced me that we've got our rating model wrong. And I really look forward to the debate, that page 105 in the paragraph in there. I hope you've all read it. And it's just that at a higher scale, all of local government should be looking at a fairer and consistent way of, I see the last paragraph there. Overall, we found that each of the rating schemes was developed in its own context and provenance. Absolutely, we can say that. We know that around here. So even among schemes with simple rating areas, it was difficult to use.
Are we on topic here?
Yeah, and it's on the report, sorry. We can't just pick out what we want out of a report and think we're just going to do this for government money. We have to be able to justify it. Because if we're saying the benefit is greater than those living in the area, and I'm sorry, but I absolutely, going back, I haven't read the news this morning, 239 dead in Durban from floods. This stuff affects people everywhere. It affects people's transport. It affects their living. We need to do to protect people with good flood schemes, but the benefits are much, much greater, as this report shows, than those just living nearby. And if we're going to support this, we need to acknowledge that in our rating system. Thank you.
Okay, we've got two recommendations. To note the report, we have a mover, we have a seconder. If there's no further discussion, Councillor Forbes.
Just waiting for there it is coming. I just want to totally recall what Kate has said. I think that's absolutely right. And everything that we're trying to do, we're trying to take a headwaters to coast approach.
Okay.
So I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Cool. Right. No further debate, no further discussion. We have a mover, we have a seconder. I'll put the motion. Those for? Aye. Against?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. Okay, second and final report is on Lake Katoto and Tomahawk Lagoon Restoration Enhancement Management Plans by Libby Caldwell. Welcome, Libby, and Andrea Howard. And Andrea Howard, endorsed by Dr. Gavin Palmer. Brief points. First one, the purpose: to seek council approval to proceed with implementation, restoration, enhancement management plans for these two catchments. The paper identifies the projects to be implemented as prioritised by the stakeholders, a wider community to enhance biodiversity, water quality, and recreational values within the catchments. The second point that stands out for me is that engagement with the two communities was initiated as water quality was found to be degrading. And that's obviously a key focus of this council. Out of this, there were three projects that were prioritised by the Lake Katoto community. One, to undertake an ecological assessment of the catchment, and second, to undertake a hydrological assessment of the catchment, and the thirdly, to get water quality data from different locations. The three projects in the Tomahawk Lagoon community that were prioritised: one, an ecological assessment; secondly, the support and formation of a catchment group; and thirdly, the establishment of a permanent water quality monitoring sites. And paragraphs 8 and 9 outline the various sums involved. So we'll do it again. We'll move into questions, followed by debate of the 5 recommendations. Do we have any questions? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. Look, I'm very happy with the motions, oddly enough, but I just want to go to the management plans and to a Katoto especially, and it's the timeframes of things happening, and I'm just a wee bit until I get the priorities. So I'm just looking through to it, the priority actions.
Actually, can I just hold you there, Councillor? I do apologise. I made a mistake. I should invite Libby or Andrea, I don't know if Andrea is there, or Dr. Palmer to make any opening comments. I do apologise, and I'll come back to you,
No
Councillor
problem.
Wilson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm on the right page with you.
Libby, I do apologise, and Gavin, is there any comments from your perspective? And thank you for all the hard work that's going on in the background.
Kia ora koutou. Here, I don't have anything else to add. I think you've summed it up pretty well, Councillor Scott. So I'm happy for questions to just go right ahead. Thank you.
Oh,
I've now found my page, so it'll be a lot easier.
Well, that's very good. Actually, if you could tell us what page that
209 or 214. And it's, thank you very much, Libby, for letting me sit in on the stakeholder engagement or one part of that. I enjoyed it. It's really engaged community, really, really excited about things happening in that Tuakatoto, and that's fabulous. But I have to say, when I look at the delivery of the priority actions, I possibly with the lens that Councillor Hope had yesterday, and feeling maybe I got up on the wrong side of the bed when I read them. But it didn't actually show much was actually really going to happen, and I'm just wondering whether we're. It's all about investigating options. It doesn't say we're actually going to do. And I appreciate there's a budget, but it could say subject to investigations meeting budget, we will actually do this and have it done. Because otherwise it didn't look like we were actually progressing a heck of a lot. And so the question is it that you're going to investigate, or do you expect by those dates in there that you will have gone further?
Yeah, so over to either Gavin or Libby. So, for example, the monitoring site, when will it actually be in place and so forth? For sites to be located?
Okay, through the chair, so the reason that we had the public consultation was so that they could provide us with feedback on all of those different priority actions or projects that were within the management plan, that are within the management plan. And the overwhelming feedback that we received through that consultation was that the community would like us to investigate further before we start undertaking any specific actions, just to make sure that when we are undertaking those actions, that might be a planting project or whatever it is, what kind of action it might be, that it's being done in the right place. So the investigative reports will help inform what we do in the future. So I totally agree with you, and I some of the feedback that we received also was around it's not time for doing reports, it's time to undertake action. So there's a fine balance between doing that and making sure we do that in the right place. So this report, when it is the ecological report, once it's complete, will help inform what action we take and where that will happen.
Can I just jump in there, Libby? Yeah, so what I take from the question is what is the completion date and what are the steps to sort of get there? So I think what you're saying, Libby, is initially you're going to undertake an ecological assessment of the catchment. And so when's that going to happen?
So we are going to go through a procurement process to get an ecologist on board to undertake that work. And my hope is that we can complete that before the 30th of June. We're kind of slowly running out of time, but as much of that as possible would be completed before the 30th of June. And through that report, it will help us to identify where are the best places within that catchment to put in those water quality monitoring sites. So a lot of the work that we'll do in the future is reliant on that ecological assessment, so that we make sure we're doing it right and not having to change.
And the hydrological assessment, when's that going to happen?
So that would come later on, and we will need to work closely with the engineering team around that. So we're going to start off with the water quality monitoring sites and the ecological assessment. Some of the ecological assessment will go into some hydrological detail, which then we can look at creating that further down the track. But what will be done within the 3 year.
Within the 3 years. And the collection of water quality data, will that happen over the 3 years or?
Yes, so we've currently got an existing water quality monitoring site within Lake Tuakitoto, and we are looking to install a second one from an ORC point of, like from a science and environmental monitoring point of view, in the middle of the lake from the 30th of June. So we'll have an extra site from then. And then as part of that ecological assessment, we'll identify where there's other potential areas where there might be poor water quality that we want to know more about, and we'll look at installing sites. So that would be within the next financial year.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Louis. You just said a whole lot of information that is absolutely exciting and it's neat, but it's actually not in the management plan. And I've just realised that I'm reflecting on my very first job with the Lands and Surveys, where I wrote management plans, and they used to have a life of 5 to 10 years, and they were actions that you were then sort of held to account on. The detail you've given, I think, is the detail that the community wants to see in the management plan. At the moment, what you just told us, and I don't mean to be critical, but what you told us about the ecological assessment sounds great, but it's not what the delivery of priority action says. It just says that you're going to be asking about costs of one and commence a request for proposal process. If it had said by 30th of September 2022, we will have that engaged, and we expect to have that by, say, March 2023, that would be brilliant. But there should be more than just we're going to start the investigations. It should be the process right through, and then people can see that that's happening and perhaps have freedom meetings scheduled as well. That's what I'd expect from a management plan, because I think at that level, but maybe I'm wrong, it is more about the actions. And I think if we get this right on this one, or all of them, then we'll have them much. This is the sort of first cab off the rank, so to speak. That we need to make sure that we keep the community engaged with what those processes are, and they can see those clear times. Is that possible to do?
Libby?
Sure. Yep, I can put some timeframes around that. The timeframe would just be for the ecological assessment at the moment, because we need to get that underway to inform what the rest of the things would be.
Yeah, cool.
Does that help?
Yeah, and thanks, Councillor Wilson. I think your point's well made.
Well, if we know we're putting in a monitor in the middle of the lake, why wouldn't we put that in as well?
Oh, yeah, we can put that one in, but it won't be the whole raft of water quality assessment we do throughout the whole catchment.
Yeah, you may struggle to get the ecological assessment done by the end of June too, by the way. But if you can, well done.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Laws.
I've got a number of questions on this, but I guess the first thing that I'd make the point of is we have a lakes management strategy that we put into the long-term plan to be done this year. Now, we've had no update of that at all, which was going to be looking at not just these 2 waterways, but other lakes in the wider region. So I guess I'm asking, where's that in connection with this? Or are these 2 things happening separate from in a piecemeal way? Because we were going to be doing a review of all of our lakes, exactly what you're suggesting, ecological assessments and things like that, or at least a strategy, an initial strategy to see what were the most degraded and what we were going to do. So can you answer that question for me?
I'll pass that over. Who would like to answer that?
We did have an update on that yesterday in the Strategy and Planning Committee with the dates, so Dr. Palmer will be able to answer.
Very good. Dr. Palmer.
Well, I know the Chief Executive would like to say something, so she may very well cover this issue, so perhaps I speak after her, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just want to remind you that, as Councillor Robertson said, you did have an update yesterday on the actions on the lake strategy, and also you've had a paper on the lake strategy that Gwyneth brought to you about the scoping for the lake strategy, which is the first part of the work that is going on this year. I would also say, given that it's been brought up, that you also heard my recommendations in the annual plan discussion about the lake strategy. It is something that I will be bringing back to you with regards to the efficiency question, because the lake strategy, when you break it down, does have the potential for efficiencies in that it is largely covered by either the regulatory matters that are contained within the Land and Water Plan or by the integrated catchment management approach that we are now rolling out. So I think there's a conversation to be had about whether the lake strategy is the best investment for us at this time, given that effectively there'll be duplication across other areas of work. So I just wanted to make that point that it's not that you haven't had any update on the lake strategy, you have in fact had that update. I would also make the point that the 3 lakes, Hayes, Te Wakatoto and Tomahawk Lagoon, were separate line items in the LTP that was approved by you, and at the time we discussed the fact that in the absence of a greater prioritisation of environmental projects, these were the projects that were effectively, to coin the phrase, shovel ready, and therefore that's why they were put up for early work in the LTP and then were later adopted by you.
Okay, I guess my response to that would be you've already had councillor feedback on that issue, but we'll have that debate at some other time. The second question that I would have is, when you talk about recruiting an ecologist, does that mean that you're going for the ecological assessments? Does that mean that you'll actually contract it out, or you're looking to employ a staff member?
Through the chair, Councillor Laws.
Sorry?
I'm just saying, I'm just suggesting that when you, the way you phrase the question, it's put through.
Oh, I'm not interested in that. I'm just asking a question. Is it intended that a specialist ecologist be recruited? Is it intended that
I am the chair of this meeting, Councillor Laws.
Oh, for Pete's sake. Is it intended that a ecologist will be recruited, or is it intended that this piece of work will be contracted out?
Dr. Palmer or Libby, can you help us on that particular question?
Through the chair, this piece of work would be contracted out.
Yeah.
So that should mean that it will be performed relatively quickly, and we should get that back by the end of the financial year, are you thinking?
That is the ideal. We need to just go through that request for proposal process, which will then be able to inform us on timeframes for when they can deliver that. But ideally it would be before the end of the financial year if they can fit it in, but we are getting closer and closer to the end of that.
Yeah, good on you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Yes.
Councillor Hope. Sure, sorry.
To be fair, it was actually Councillor Malcolm Wade.
No, you're right. There you go.
Thank you, Libby. We talk about for Lake Te Potato, ecological assessment for the catchment, water monitoring and hydrological assessment. There's some great work going on here, and you've got a wonderful catchment around you, which is great because that's giving increasing support for everybody. I wanted to ask you, you've got Robson's Lagoon just next door, haven't you? Is there a connection between these 3 projects with Robson's Lagoon and the access as well, please?
Through the chair, do you mean the access for the walking track that is currently around the lake?
Yes, I do. It's always been highlighted, hasn't it? How people come together and they say what they love about the whole area, and that's certainly one aspect that has been strong. So I just wondered, yes, is there a connection, and also just with Robson's Lagoon itself?
Yes, through the chair, there is definitely a connection between the work that's going on at Robson's Lagoon. They all form part of the same wetland complex, so that it's all connected and together. So all of the work that's going on to enhance Robson's Lagoon has an impact on the lake down further below. So that's wonderful that it's all working collectively. In regards to the access track that currently is still in place, and the feedback that I've had from the community is that it's not in tip-top shape, and that there's some times of the year that you can't always walk around the lake due to the lake levels. I was surprised that wasn't one of the top projects that was prioritised by the community, but it was something that we can look into later on to look at how we can work to enhance that. And I just want to reiterate, this plan is not just a plan for ORC, it's a plan for the whole community. So there might be actions that other groups or industry or the district council might want to take and run with in conjunction with the work that we do at the same time.
Thank you, Libby, appreciate that.
And I suspect some synergy will come through the hydrological assessment between the different areas too. So thank you. Sorry, Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, paragraph 23, Tomahawk Lagoon, it's managed by the Department of Conservation. It's good to see that they're managing such a pristine waterway. So what contribution do we get from the department, or have we approached them to get full contribution on this project?
Through the chair, we have approached the Department of Conservation early on, and also we engage them through all of our key stakeholder updates that we provide on Tomahawk Lagoon. What they do is that they maintain there's a walking track that goes along the edge of the lagoon, so they maintain that. That is pretty much the limit of their contribution at the moment. But having a plan like this, I'm hopeful that it can encourage them to provide more support to a water body and the area around that they manage, and is a really important part of our ecosystem for wildlife management. So I'm hopeful that that will provide some more guidance to them around what we might be looking for.
Thank you. And a couple of follow-up questions. On page 202, we've got the A, B, and C in both areas that you're going to do, which is the ecological assessment, water quality data, hydrological assessments. So in that, and that's the community priority, have we not got data already on those areas? Because I think even through EcoFund, we were getting groups and we supported groups getting data on Tomahawk Lagoon. That was probably a couple of years ago. So is there not enough data about to actually start some of the, or identify what remedial action or get some remedial action going?
Through the chair, yes, we have funded and continue to support through our catchment advisor team, Eco Otago, who are the citizen science group that work within Tomahawk Lagoon. They are limited in the information that they collect, and most of the work that they are doing is within the lagoon itself, and the ecological assessment is that's proposed is to look at the whole catchment rather than just at the bottom, and see how we can work to identify areas where there is an opportunity to enhance those, and that might be working alongside private landowners in some instances. So the ecologists that we employ will need to use the information that's been collected through Eco Otago over the last 5 years, and that's really valuable information to have. It's just so it's a good starting point. It just doesn't give us the full picture of the whole catchment.
Look, and it's no reflection on what you do, because I think your plan is quite superb, really, and it's it is starting making sure we know exactly what we're dealing with. So it's just a shame that it's actually taken so long. When you look at the lake, Tukuiti, in 2004, we went and built a boardwalk. So I thought, well, probably when we're building a boardwalk, someone might have thought, well, let's have a look at the condition of the lake and get something going. So I had one more question on your plan.
Can I just reply to that?
Yeah.
Just
well, this wasn't a question, but you can.
Just make the point that, for example, Tomahawk, it seems to me as an observer, it's sort of been stop, start, whereas this council is actually making a significant, the first time, a significant financial commitment. So ideally, there are some outcomes that come out of it, and I share your frustration in terms of how do you get improvement. So the ecological assessment will provide some focus. The catchment group that's being established will ideally also provide some outcomes.
It's a superb plan. So going to page 2007, on water quality improvements, where there's funding scheme provided for landowners to restore buffer riparian zones and recreate wetlands in the upper catchment. So have there any thoughts around what that funding options will be, and will it be a repayable funding? So it'll be more as a loan to repay as opposed to a grant, or are we not at that stage yet? And if you're not, I'm not too panicking, I'll just think about it later.
Through the chair, we haven't gone into the detail around what that would look like. That's just it could be that we look to provide funding specifically to this catchment, and maybe the landowners contribute 50% and we contribute 50% as an example, but we haven't gone into that detail yet.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Cool. Councillor Carlett, question, yeah?
I wondered whether it was worth having a look at what DOC thinks its relationship to the Tomahawk Lagoon is. If it thinks it owns it, what obligations does it think it has? Where does it fit? Because when we start sort of throwing around words like stakeholders and things and who's doing what, I think it would be worth actually getting to the bottom of sort of in their books, what is it? Is it an asset of theirs? Is it do they think they own it? What do they think? And somewhere in that, whether that's a desktop exercise about looking at their stuff about what they own and what they have, or whether it's us asking in an email where they fit into that, not just what we're collaborating on and are they a stakeholder of ours or something, but I would be interested just technically to know where they actually sit, so as that if we want to put any pressure on them to come more to the party than they currently do, for example, would that be reasonable or would it not? So I just like to know a wee bit more about that. Not today, I'm just saying, could we just either have a look if we can or ask them if we can't and get to the bottom of what their relationship with that asset is and therefore what might be expected.
Thank you. Libby, have we had that conversation?
Through the chair, yes, I have had that conversation initially, and I guess I can't speak necessarily on behalf of DOC, but it seemed as though their funding streams were elsewhere, and so I'm not really sure what more I can.
Sorry. No. Actually, the question wasn't what do they think they would like to do for us. The question was what is their actual technical responsibilities and things. Not so it wasn't a sort of a conversation thing. It was could we have an email or can we get to the bottom of it in writing as to what their relationship with that asset, if you couldn't call it that, and does it belong to them and those sorts of things. So
apologies. Have you taken that on board, Libby?
Through the chair, yes, that's fine. I can follow that up and get something in writing to tell us what their control mechanisms are or their management mechanisms are.
Right.
Sorry, that isn't totally it either. Not what they want to do, what their obligations are, where their responsibilities are and things.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Councillor Decker.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Kevin Malcolm for the points he raised related to Tomahawk Lagoon and the way in which this council has pretty consistently funded Eco Otago in the excellent work they've done there with multi-school groups of students in assessing the water quality of the lagoon. I agree with Libby when she says that an ecological assessment needs to be done of the whole catchment and not just of the bottom of it. That makes a great deal of logical sense. And I wonder whether, Libby, you'd be able, given the fact that the current EcoFund round closes in just 2 weeks, if there was an application again from Eco Otago, could you have a good scrutiny of it to see that it is going to contribute to your action plan in the way that we would like it to? That would be really helpful if you could keep an eye on the EcoFund applications. And if there is one related to Tomahawk, could you contribute your analysis of how valuable that application is so that the panel can, both the staff panel and the councillor panel for the EcoFund can assess it with your perspective in mind? That's the first point. And I see you nodding, Libby, so that's good. The second point is the word Tomahawk. That has always bothered me. It's one of those typical Otago bastardizations of Māori names. The Scots seem to be unable to get their head around Māori. The proper name for that lagoon is Tomahaka. It's not Tomahawk to do with an axe or a weapon. It's Tomahaka related to a burial place for bones. And I wonder whether the Otago Regional Council could somehow lead the way in correcting that historical mistake, if you like, and get the right name and the right lake. We should be calling it Tomahaka from now on, not Tomahawk. And the same could be said about Waihola and all those other dreadful names that we have that corrupt the Maori language. Anyway, that's a point which has nothing to do with this report. I'm sorry, but I think that's something the council should consider in its cultural sensitivity moves. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman.
No, great. Please don't apologise. That was a very relevant point.
Could I move?
Yeah.
What
Yes.
Councillor Wilson has circulated.
What does she circulate?
Would you like me to read it to you?
No, we could put it on the screen, maybe.
Yes.
Liz has got it. Amended slightly. I did another typo.
I'm aware that we've got something starting with an outside person leading it at 10:30.
Okay. Just while Liz, you're going to put that up on the screen.
I can read it while she's putting it up.
No, but we'll put that up on the screen. Is there any, we've had questions, is there any, while that's coming on this, okay, here we go. You could read that. Could we enlarge it?
What's different?
The bold.
Approves the initial draft of ongoing development of management plans, okay. And local catchments. Okay. Libby, Gavin, were there any, were you comfortable with the recommendations? Not that we necessarily have to get agreement, but it'd be good to get your feedback. You okay?
Mr. Chairman, I just maybe you
We're
might
in
like to.
debate.
Actually, that's a good point.
Excuse me.
No, I apologise.
No one's moved.
Actually, this wasn't on the debate.
Yes, I've moved. No, I've moved it. I thought I'd moved it.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you didn't.
I'm
give a
happy to second.
second.
Yeah.
I thought you'd said second. I'm happy to second.
Okay. Okay, we've moved into the debate. We have a mover. Do we have a seconder?
Yeah.
Fine. Okay, let's debate it. Is everybody comfortable with it?
Brief comment.
Councillor Name.
Look, thanks, Libby, for getting this report to the committee. I just reflect on the priority lakes that we have. These two, Tomahaka, picking up on Councillor Dika's point, Tuakaitoto and Lake Hayes as our three top priorities for Otago, and there's a really good reason why we've got those 3 lakes on our hit list because historically there has been enough information to indicate that we need to be lifting our game in these 3 lakes and within the catchment, etc. So really good to get to this point. Just a couple of comments around the importance of the ecological assessment and hydrology assessment. And as you know, I'm a layperson, but many years ago I did have an ecological assessment done on my farm, and I realised then what ecology and biodiversity I had. Up until that point, I had no idea what I actually was lucky enough to have on the property. And once you have that information, then you can direct the appropriate funding and do the right thing. But unless you've got that information, it's probably a bit like building a house. If you don't put the foundations in deep enough, the house won't remain standing for long, if you know what I mean. So same with the hydrology assessment and obviously the water quality testing. I mean, they're all critical sort of foundations for a better outcome for the environment and water quality. So yeah, very supportive.
Very supportive. Thank you. Councillor Wilson and Councillor Robinson.
I'm really supportive of this. The reasons for the changes in the words in my mind is that I think these are, as you've suggested, Libby, dynamic documents that keep on changing, and I'm not sure that we want to necessarily see every iteration. I hope that this wording will allow you to keep on developing these without having to come back, although we'd love to hear how things are going. The other part is with the words with communities. For me, there are clear actions in there about catchment groups forming, I think, the Tomahaka management plan, and I'm very happy if anyone else wants to second me to move as a subsequent motion that we add that we now refer to the Tomahaka lagoon rather than Tomahawk. But I'll leave that for. I think Michael Decker actually would like to probably move or second that, so I'm happy to leave it as a subsequent motion, not ask mover. Thank you.
Go, Kate. That's great.
The other part of that is the actions that the community are doing, like forming catchment groups, I think should be in a plan, and that they also have their actions in as a combined plan. And if we're going to really be truly integrated catchment management and everything like that, we actually have to have not only our actions, but the ones of the community, so we can see the in-kind stuff that is being done and value it. So for those reasons, I'm really happy with the wording as amended. I expect it to be a constant changing dynamic document that's really exciting, and as needs change, will change. But I think we should be quite clear that the community are involved and put what they're doing in there as well.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson. Sorry,
just a point of order. I'm not one to use point of order, but in terms of the Tomahaka conversation versus Tomahawk, I think it would be wise to take that sort of discussion to mana to initially get the direction. No disrespect to Councillor Decker and others who have spoken in favour, get that, but let's go to the mana to mana initially.
Sounds good. Are you okay with that, Councillor Decker?
Yeah, I am, and I think, Andrew, that we should also seek their wisdom on names like the Kilmog, which I understand should be Kuramika, in Waihola, which has some other genuine Māori name. Pardon? Oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah, well, I mean, we could go on forever probably, but that's a good conversation to have at mana to mana. Thanks for the suggestion, Andrew.
Right, okay. We've got Councillor Robinson and Councillor Melton.
Sorry, conscious of time. Yeah, that's good discussion on the point of order, and yeah, there is a mapping project going on, isn't there, for all the place names at the moment through Kaitahu, and the timing and process for how names would be restored, I think, is broader than us as a council in terms of when and how that's done. So I think rather than owning the space to talk about it's a really good step forward. The other thing is we've got two obligations here. One is that under the law, we have to restore degraded waterways. We have to protect wetlands too, actually. And the other is to the community who have been working with us for a very long time and have commitments with us through annual planning. So that's fantastic that we are at this point. The point two, I can see that that leaves a bit of open-endedness, but to be honest, the way that the management plan is written at the moment, I do hear what Kate Wilson is saying. We're actually putting in things that it doesn't say already, so it doesn't necessarily reflect what we're actually doing. So it's kind of an evolving document, and also I think what Councillor Wilson was thinking of with their communities reflects that a management plan has parts that community does and parts that council does, and that there can be things that can be going on that communities doing themselves. So whilst we're not thinking that the community can come in and put in extra spending that reflects on the council at any moment, that, you know, there are things that are done in conjunction with the community. So I think that wording is appropriate in my mind.
Okay, no, that's good. And because one of the things we didn't talk about was we've identified 3 priorities, but there's these other sub-projects potentially as well. Councillor Malcolm?
Yeah, well, I'm going to vote against changing of the words to the degree that they're being changed, because I think we actually have been given a management plan. Will be a plan that will evolve over time, but it is not a draft management plan. It's a management plan that staff have prepared, and I'm happy with. So I don't think it's a draft plan, but it will be a plan. And I'm probably not unhappy with the rest of the wording about ongoing development of that plan. So I don't believe it is a draft plan. They would have said draft and come to us as a draft.
Councillor Wilson, what about just to say it approves the ongoing development of management plans for Tom?
You'd have to talk to the mover first.
Mover. What's your response to that? Do we need to have, because it is a bit denigrating, probably the point where we're at.
I'm happy if the second is happy.
Would we approve the management plan?
No, the initial, take out the word draft, I don't mind, but I'm nothing other. That is initial.
Yeah, that's cool. Yep.
Initial management plan, ongoing development. Sounds good. Sounds good.
And I'm exceptionally happy with the name Tomahawk until we have consultation with the community of that area. Change the name of Kuria without going to the people of Kuria, and you might have a battle. So I thought the community, it's their place, they should be consulted any inkling of any change. Simple as that.
Okay.
It's not their language.
Okay.
The language of the community is the language that the community uses.
Well, I think that's a debate for another day. And I'm hoping that day is not that far away, and we do have a wonderful forum from mana to mana, and there's independent processes going on. So I look forward
also
to
have a
that.
community.
Thank you. Anyway, we
Back up.
if we can have that back up so that everybody's comfortable with it. There are 5 recommendations, and I'm conscious of time. Councillor Calvert will be getting a bit fidgety in his seat. We've got 7 there now. What's actually happened there? We had 5 recommendations that now we have
There you go.
Okay, so in bold of the changes, we've had a compromise with Councillor Malcolm. Notes approves the initial plan with the first development, improving commencement and implementation, with noting project implementation will proceed this financial year. Notes implementation in future years is dependent on annual plan decisions on council will be guided by ecological assessment progress that arise through these. There it is. We have a mover, we have a second. I'll put the motion. Those for?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. I'll close today's meeting with the implementation committee. Thank you.